Hi guys and welcome to another Hero of the Week. This week's hero is Carol Vorderman, the TV celebrity turned political activist. Now she was very vocal in the run-up to the election about the importance of tactical voting to kick the Tories out, but didn't stop there. She wants reforms to the voting system and also those who have access to politicians, namely think tanks. So while most political parties will listen to what think tanks have to tell them and sometimes use that information to formulate policy, the problem with the Tories is that they relied on organisations that went out of their way to hide who funded them, and many of course operated out of 55 Tufton Street. This kind of dodgy behaviour helps foster mistrust in politics. Have a listen.
Are you saying that on the whole, TV shouldn't be opened up to political voices? Do you feel like that has become an issue?
Well, let's be honest, I referenced it, the Tufton Street mob. Why are they there as independent political voices? They are opaquely funded. And the BBC has all the, this stuff about impartiality, as I know. But it's nonsense because, here's somebody from whether it's the Centre for Policy Studies or the IEA or all of them, Tax Alliance. It's like you're platforming these people and their views, and what you find on social media is everyone's calling it out, and that's where the mistrust escalates.
So well said, Carol. I completely agree. I've been saying this for so long. Organisations like the IEA or the Taxpayers Alliance, their representatives have appeared on BBC programmes like Question Time or Newsnight, where they present a position. Now that's fine, but if we knew who actually funded them, we could get to the root of the problem. Because, for example, and I've highlighted this before, the IEA, they advocate for the abolition of the NHS. Now, sometimes they will say this directly, other times they will say it indirectly. For example, if the topic is the NHS or healthcare, they'll start off by saying how it's broken, how huge amounts of money have been poured into the NHS, and it needs to be reformed. Now, when they say reform, they're not talking about improving the NHS for patients. This is about allowing more private companies access to the healthcare system and perhaps eventually having something like an American style model. Because as we don't know who funds these organizations, we have to rely on journalists doing a lot of digging. And when it comes to, for example, dealing with net zero or climate change, these organizations like this one receive funding from the fossil fuel industry. So whenever, for example, climate change is brought up, they will say that net zero is too expensive or that it's going to drive up energy prices, and there should be more funding, for example, for the fossil fuel industry, or at least there should be less funding for renewables, that they're unreliable or whatever. So instead of actually coming to the interview or coming to the panel and presenting facts and showing this is the data and why you're saying that, they are opaque. Another example is the Taxpayers Alliance. So by the sound of the name, you imagine it's a Taxpayers Alliance, but in reality it has close ties to the Conservative Party, and some of its donors are multimillionaires whose goal is, of course, to cut taxes on the richest in society. But they won't present themselves like that. They will say that taxes are too high for working people. This is a massive problem. It's okay for a think tank to come on a show and explain, look, we should do this or we believe we should do that, if we know who's actually funding them. But with many of the organizations that operated outside or out of 55 Tufton Street, who've since then moved their addresses, their goal was to be opaque and their goal was to serve their donors. It was to change the political landscape, to convince the public that, for example, the NHS needs massive reform, needs more private sector operations within it. And of course, their goal was not to improve health for ordinary people, for citizens. It was about increasing profits for their donors. And of course, the massive problem is that the BBC platformed these organizations. They gave them a voice. And of course, they weren't transparent themselves in explaining to the public who these people are, what these organizations represent, and the fact that they're not transparent in their funding. Well said, Carol. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.